Hey, everybody, did you miss me? I know I did. Well, let's move on, shall we? It's time for Chapter 17 in Sociology, the Economy and Work. I'm going to start off with a quote from Warren Harding. Let me pause for a moment. Who was he? Warren Harding. President, United States, 1900s, early 1900s. Anyway, he said, the business of the United States is business. Well, the economy is defined in your text as the social institution that organizes the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. In other words, all three elements have to be in place. You have to produce, distribute, and then you have to look at the consumption and how much people are consuming. Woody Allen, again, I feel it's necessary to preface this by saying he's a comedian. He said, economics is a study of money and why it is good. See, when you take an economics class, they never question the whole thing. They just, tell you how it all works. Well, I'll move on. I know you're kind of busy here. Get to the highlights. Okay. You need to know, starting on page 445, about the post-industrial society, the information revolution, and the post-industrial society, I should say. It is a productive system based on service work and high technology. Computerized machinery is replacing human labor in production. So specifically, you need to know what are the three major trends of the post-industrial economy. And they are, number one, we're moving from tangible products to ideas. Work involves creating and manipulating symbols, not symbols, symbols. Two, we're moving from mechanical skills to literary skills. Speaking and writing well and using a computer are in high demand. Hence, you will see virtually every college has not just one, but two writing courses. Not that it seems to, and you're all benefiting from it as well. So yes, you need to learn to write well, speak well, because if you can't express yourself effectively in writing, people may mistakenly think you're a dope. So, and because people do not write as well today as they once did, if you can write well, you will stand out in a very positive way. And I will say once again, as you write, so shall you speak, and as you speak, so shall you write. So again, I noticed that when people start working on their writing, they initially write exactly the way they speak with the same slang and everything. So understandable, but it's not necessarily proper grammar. Three, work is being decentralized away from factories to almost anywhere, which accounts for the rising number of computers in homes and home offices, which we have particularly seen during the pandemic. It's interesting because one of the outcomes of the pandemic, one of the many outcomes of the pandemic, is that some companies are beginning to realize, you know what, why are we paying to have this building when people can effectively work can function pretty effectively from at home and still get all the work done. But then there's that still, it's, we want to watch you. But hey, you can watch you on the computer too. So, and then there's the, well, what about, people in the workplace, they want to fraternize and interact. And not me, but I know that works for some people. Anyway, so this isn't unique to the United States. This, which is a post-industrial society, this is true of all post-industrial societies, that we are moving into what's called service economies, the so-called tertiary sector of the economy. Check out figure 17-1. Okay, so primary is 1, secondary is 2, tertiary is 3. Okay, so services are, think about it, most of us are providing services for one another, whether it's auto tech or cosmetologist or banker or social worker or nurse or professor. And it's replaced what was once a heavily manufacturing economy here in the United States. So currently, um, the primary sector is accumulating raw materials like cutting down trees, mining, so forth. That's only 1% of our economy. The secondary sector, manufacturing, is 18%, where at one time, if you go to the early 1900s, it dominated the economy. And the tertiary sector, services, is 81% of the economy. Alrighty. Are we developing a global economy? Clearly, we are. It is expanding economic activity that crosses national borders. So we now have the global division of labor. In the United States, the economy reflects 5% of the world's population, but we generate 20% of the world's total output. There's also an increasing number of products that pass through more than one market. Excuse me. For example, there is a type of coconut oil I favor that is grown organically and pressed, cold pressed in the Philippines. It then goes over to Denmark and gets further processed some way, and then it gets sent over here. Three, national governments no longer control the economic activity that takes place within their borders. Why? Because of the rise of multinational corporations. Think about the term multinational. They're headquartered in various countries. So, for example, Nestle, which is the biggest food company in the world, is headquartered in Switzerland, but it also has headquarters in other parts of the world too, including the United States. You know, the Swiss are just amazing in terms of they have in terms of the richest society in the world in terms of per capita income, and so many big corporations and um, uh, world gatherings are held in Switzerland, economic gatherings and so forth, because they are a small country, only I guess about 8 million people, but they're just an economic blockbuster in terms of their disproportionate influence on the economies of the world. And we haven't even gotten into the Swiss banking system. Okay, the largest multinational corporations, so we're talking about some 2,000 corporations, account for 1/2 of the world's total economic output. 2,000 corporations, multinationals, also known as MNCs, get it? Multinational corporate, account for half the world's economic output. In recent years, exports have accounted for most of the growth of the United States economy, and most of this is the output of the multinational corporations. This raises concerns about the rights and opportunities of workers. So there's been understandable concern how in the last 30, 40 years, so many jobs have been lost overseas to manufacturing facilities in China or in Mexico or Thailand or Vietnam or Cambodia or other parts of the world that can produce stuff because their labor is so much cheaper than ours. Half of all consumer items purchased in the United States are made outside the country. So again, the trade-off is, okay, well, we lost all these jobs as companies shut down production in the United States and move it to another country where labor is cheaper. But then the counter argument is, but we get stuff back cheaper. But as I said before, it's not if you have $18 an hour job and that's shipped over to Mexico where they only have to pay somebody $2.75 or $3 an hour, there is no way the price of the goods coming back reflects that $18 an hour you're no longer making in your job. Economic systems, paths to justice, on page, I will find it, or maybe I won't. Page, well, I have no idea why I didn't write this down. But anyway, we're going to start with capitalism. And hey, you can call me right now and tell me what page number it's on because I forgot to write it down for you. But anyway, you'll find it. I think it's page 448 if I can read my scribbling here. Okay, capitalism. Why do you need to know about it? This is our economic system. Now, not to be confused with our political system, because I hear this confusion all the time. Our political system is a Republican form of democracy, not Republican Party, but our democratic form is that of a republic. Our economic system is capitalism, two different things. Capitalism is an economic system in which natural resources and the means for producing goods and services are privately owned. It features, as I just mentioned, private ownership of property. In other words, beyond your private possessions, we can own wealth producing property. And I mentioned when we mentioned the two key data points you need to know, four key data points you need to know for the next exam is the distribution of wealth and the distribution of income in the United States between the top fifth and the bottom fifth. The top fifth, the top 20% of the population in the United States controls 90%, almost 90% of all wealth. So as a result of private ownership of wealth, it has all been accumulated by just 20% of the people, or most of it. Two, pursuit of personal profit. Through the pursuit of individual self-interest, Adam Smith, who wrote Wealth of Nations in 1776, which is the ideology behind, or he provides the ideology behind capitalism, said that private property is accumulated, thus creating common good through collective wealth and prosperity. Okay, so here is Adam Smith's argument, and this fits so perfectly with our approach to individualism. Adam Smith said, let's go back to my example many chapters ago that I'm now producing tie-dye shirts. Now, do I produce tie-dye shirts because I care about you? Not really. I only care about you buying my tie-dye shirts. My focus shouldn't be on you. My focus on me, my self-interest, and your self-interest are none of my business. And so I'm going to be focused on my self-interest, and I sell t-shirts simply because I'm trying to raise money for me, right? Now, what's your self-interest? Whatever service or good you're producing or selling, that's your self-interest. So the thinking is, if you are only focusing on your self-interests and what is best for me, and only I can determine what's best for me, and only you can determine what's best for you, and if you're self-responsible, in other words, you're willing to take the consequences for your actions, I'm not going to blame society. I made the decision, it's on me. If every one of us did that, and you added that up, you would have the collective good in society, is what Adam Smith is arguing. And you would also have a wonderfully functioning economy. Now, he certainly has lots of caveats to that, but that's the basis. So he said, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. Again, self-interest is not to be confused with greed. That's where most of us are at now. But the original intent was simply self-interest, do what's best for you. A third feature of capitalism is free competition and consumer choice. Through free market competition and the invisible hand of the market, goods will be available that the public wants and at prices the public demands. So supply and demand operates like a machine. Let's see, if we don't have enough water and there's a drought and I do have water, I'll charge top dollar for water because it's in my self-interest to do so. It's supply and demand. Now, there'd be a point at which we even have laws against gouging, so I can't overdo it. But on the other hand, if I'm selling tie-dye shirts, and I can't imagine what reason people wouldn't want an authentic hippies tie-dye shirts, and I got a warehouse full of them, well, all of a sudden, guess what's going to happen to the price of my tie-dye shirts? They're going to drop like a rock. We're going to have a buy one, get one free or whatever, so I can get rid of these t-shirts and at least get some of my money back. So that's supply and demand. Now, the other argument with supply and demand is that products will always be available if that's something the public wants. So, who's going to produce the next Chia Pet? And on the other hand, and it'll always be at prices the public demands. Why? Is because if I'm charging too much for my tie-dye shirts, Like say I'm charging 20 bucks and somebody else is offering the same damn shirt for 10 bucks, you're not going to buy from me anymore. You're going to buy from that other person. So supply and demand controls prices as well, and prevents price gouging in theory. And this is why it was called the invisible hand of the market. You know, interestingly or not, biologists certainly know this, and maybe you know this from biology class, but there is an incredibly tight relationship between fungi and plants. And without one, the other can't survive. They're dependent upon each other, and they have a symbiotic relationship. And so the mushroom, the fungus, provides phosphorus for the plant, and the plant in return provides carbon for the fungus. And they've actually done experiments on this, and they found that it works just like supply and demand. So if there's an abundance of phosphorus available to the fungus, it expects more carbon in return from the plant. And if there's a shortage of, if there's a shortage, let's start off, if there's a shortage of phosphorus, then the fungus expects more in the return of carbon for this precious amount of phosphorus. On the other hand, if phosphorus is abundant, the plant's not going to give out as much carbon for it because there's plenty of phosphorus to go around. So they eat. It's even been found that supply and demand works at the plant level in the symbiotic relationship between fungi and plants. Well, not everybody is a fan of the free competition and the free market and the invisible hand. Edward Neal said, the invisible hand, if it is to be found anywhere, is likely to be found picking the pockets of the poor. See, once again, capitalism is competition for food, clothing, and shelter. And so in any game of competition, there's going to be winners and losers. And the winners are the ones who are best predisposed to win, to take advantage of capitalism, which is people who already have wealth, because wealth begets more wealth. And the people who are less disposed to being successful in the game of capitalism are low-income people, because they don't have money to leverage getting more money. Again, every economist in the world will agree that capitalism does lots of good things, but one of the negative things is it generates considerable inequality. Well, Irving Kristol said capitalism delivers many good things, but in the whole, equality is not one of them. Rather, capitalism has always stood for the absence of artificial barriers to economic activity and opportunity. Well, one of the barriers that Smith warned against, Adam Smith, was interference by the government into the marketplace. So it kind of makes sense. If I'm selling tie-dye shirts, you know, there's only so much cotton I can buy, or hemp I can buy in order to make my tie-dye shirts that I can afford to buy. But what if the government decides they're going to start making tie-dye shirts? Well, with the amount of money available to the government, they can get a much cheaper price on cotton or hemp than I can, because I can buy it in huge volumes that I couldn't possibly afford to do. And so as a result, if the government starts producing products, it drives everybody else making those products out of business. But that was just one form of interference. So what happened is, I'll give you the short answer here of how things evolved. Up until the Great Depression, which I experience every time one of my jokes bombs, which is frequently, up until the Great Depression in the 1930s, worldwide Great Depression, classical economics was pretty much what everybody followed. And classical economics was, as I just described, there's the supply and demand, the invisible hand of the market. You don't interfere with it. It runs great by itself. And the thinking is, yes, capitalist markets go up and down, depression, recession, up and boom cycle, bust cycle. And so that's just the nature of the markets. And whenever we're in the bust cycle, you just have to be patient, because the boom cycle is on its way back. It just works like the pendulum on a clock, back and forth. And so that's why one of the famous statements by, I believe it was Herbert Hoover, prior to the Great Depression, when he was president and did not get reelected, got defeated by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is he said, prosperity is just around the corner. which people thought was callous, but he was falling back on classical economics, meaning, yeah, and it was a political pitch too to get reelected, but he was falling on the fact that don't worry, the economy will come back. It always does. It's sort of like saying, don't worry, the pandemic will disappear. In time, it will. Yes, I don't know how many years, but yeah, that's actually factual. It will disappear. Anyway, so with the Great Depression, it occurred to people, this isn't coming back. The market's not coming back. And so a British economist by the name of, are you ready for this? John Maynard Keynes, Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, Sir John Maynard Keynes, I might add, introduced a new economic approach. And he argued that a depressed economy may just stay depressed. And so the only way to get the economy out of this depression is the government has to intervene in as many ways as possible. And this is called Keynesian economic policies. Now, there are two ways this can happen. One is the conservative approach, currently favored by conservatives and Republicans, called trickle-down economics. And the idea is that you give tax benefits to corporations and to the wealthy, which frees up their capital to reinvest in the economy or expand capacity at their plants, corporations. And as a result, by giving the money to the top in the form of these tax benefits, the benefits trickle down to the workers. The other approach is approach many of us are familiar with on the weekend. It's called the bottom-up approach. With the bottom-up Keynesian approach, the idea is no. You got to put money in the hands of low-income people and working people. Now, why? Is because there's an economic law saying the poor have a low propensity to save, which is another way of saying the poor can't afford to save. Every dollar you give a poor person, that person will have to spend in order to survive. So if you give, let's suppose we said to everybody in America, hey, we're going to try to help you out economically. We're gonna send you $400. Okay. Well, what are rich people going to do with it? They ain't going to spend it. They'll just put it in the bank account. But the rest of us will have to spend it immediately because we need the $400 to meet our current needs. As I speak, approximately one half, this is before the pandemic, one half of the American public said there's at least one bill a month that's a required bill like electric or something that they can't pay. They have to put off to the next month. That's how close to the vest most Americans have to play it. So the idea is, no, what you got to do is you got to put money in the hands of the poor. And as a result, when the poor have money, they'll spend it. Oh, when they spend it, that means the retailer makes money, the wholesaler makes money, the corporation makes money, and the benefits go up through society, the bottom-up approach. It's interesting because studies done of the trickle-down approach show that at best it works for maybe a year and that's it. Whereas typically the bottom-up approach is a much more effective one. And I'll tell you exactly a great example of why. After the Great Recession hit in 2008, what immediately happened is most people just stopped buying. And the reason why is they were freaked out. And so they started to save and pay down their credit cards because at that point we had reached the greatest credit card debt level ever. So they started paying down their credit cards and they didn't spend. Well, if they don't spend, remember this economy is 70% based on consumer spending. The economy just froze up. Credit froze and other things were going on too. But here's the point. You can do the trickle down approach all you want and give tax benefits to the rich and say, well, they'll reinvest and they'll expand production. It doesn't matter if people aren't buying anything. So because people weren't buying anything, the whole economy came to a screeching halt. And so, the idea is you want to be a patriot, buy that crap. Okay, so through Keynesian economic policies, the government extensively intervenes in the marketplace through regulations. We've seen it in the Trump administration through tariffs, although for the most part, tariffs in the modern global economy were a thing of the past until Trump took office. What else? Government spending on military. Some people argue that the only reason we got out of the Great Depression is World War II came along. And when World War II came along, we had a full production economy. So while those were largely, primarily men were fighting the war overseas, it was the women, the so-called Rosie the Riveter, manning the factories, creating aircraft, munitions, tanks, trucks, and so forth. The women were doing all the factory work. Of course, as soon as the men came back from the war, they got kicked out of the factory, the women, and that was the end of that, until more recently, anyway. So that government spending on the military was massive at the time. And some argue it's only because anywhere from 20 to 25% of military of spending now is military spending that keeps the economy going. So, or here's another, well, anyway, so it keeps the economy going with just military spending. And the other thing is welfare programs. I mentioned in the previous chapter's discussion that half of the federal budget goes to just two programs, and that's Medicare and Social Security. So that kind of spending puts money right into the hands of people, or in the case of Medicare, saves them from having to spend on medical care. And so that gives them more disposable income. So as a result, they can keep the economy going by buying that stuff. Columnist George Will said the market delivers rough justice. The welfare state takes the roughness out of the justice. So in theory, the idea is that we tax the rich and take the proceeds from those taxes and give it in the form of welfare benefits to the poor to reduce the inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor. Socialism, the description begins on page 449, an economic system in which natural resources are collectively owned and the means of producing goods. Natural resources and the means of producing goods are collectively owned. So while individuals may own private possessions, they may not own and accumulate wealth producing property. Why? Because all the people depend upon it to meet their needs. Wealth producing property must be owned collectively by all the people. This could range from government ownership, which was the case under communism, to employee-owned companies and farms. Employee-owned farms was the case with the Israeli kibbutzim. And the idea I keep pitching, which is not unique to me, it's already happening around America, is employee-owned, worker-owned businesses. Now, I know this seems like people say, well, that's crazy. What do you mean you can't own private property? That sounds, that sounds wrong. It's unnatural. It's un-American. Again, I point out for most of our human history, we lived in hunting and gathering tribes. Hunting and gathering tribes practice collectivity. They acquired and shared resources collectively. So the case could well be made, and I'm making it, it is much more natural to have an economy that operates collectively than it is to compete. A second feature of socialism, pursuit of collective goals. Individual pursuit of profit is at odds with what may be best for the collectivity of people. And I hear this often argued that, the bottom line is also what's best for people. So let's privatize everything. We'll privatize prisons. We'll privatize long-term care facilities. Well, I've already seen when that happens. And what happens is if they're not making a profit, things are going to get cut back at that long-term care facility. And the things that usually get cut back first are quality of life types of programs and activities. So for Adam Smith, the architect of capitalism, there is no explicit category of the social. Social good springs from individual interests. In contrast, for Karl Marx, the architect of capitalism, there is no explicit category of the individual. Individual satisfaction springs from collective activity. And a third feature of socialism is government control of the economy. A free market is not self-regulating in a way that meets people's needs. The government, through a centrally controlled economy, directs production and distribution of goods and services to meet people's needs. Norman Mailer was not a fan of socialism. He said the function of socialism is to raise human suffering to a higher level. Well, socialism and communism. Socialism was for Karl Marx the path to the utopian ideal of communism, think of the word commune, where everyone in society has social equality and the government is virtually non-existent. And so that's where we get confused with communism. We look at communism as how it was practiced in the Soviet Union and currently in the People's Republic of China. And we go, well, that's a totalitarian system. Yeah, it is. So that is their form of governance is totalitarianism, and their form of economy is socialism. And we totally confuse the two. It's like, we don't want socialism. We want to be like the Soviet Union. We want to be communist. They're two different things. We have never seen communism practiced in the way Karl Marx envisioned it. Maybe we never will. I don't know. Um, so the way that's been practiced in the Soviet Union or the People's Republic China are neither Marxist nor communist in the way he envisioned it. By the way, when he said socialism was the path to the utopian ideal of communism, I used to think utopia meant like a heavenly place or something, but it means no such place. Okay. A survey was done in China, and in the survey, 4% of the population supported, of the respondents, I should say, supported the statement, never think of yourself, give everything in service to society. 68% supported, work hard and get rich. They're coming around to our team. Now, understand this. There is no such thing as a pure capitalist or a pure socialist society. Every economy is a blend of socialism and capitalism, including ours. So, to say, well, we're not gonna have socialism in the United States, too late. We've had it since the 1930s, and it expresses itself in many forms besides welfare, including ways in which the government helps out big business, which I notice conservatives have no problem with and don't label it for what it is, socialism. Okay, page 450, welfare capitalism. You need to know the other forms of economies that are around in the world today. Welfare capitalism is also sometimes called democratic socialism. It's a kind of merger between socialist economic policies and a democratic political system. So it's an economic and political system that combines significant government intervention into the economy along with free elections. Our examples are most of the countries in Western Europe, Australia, Canada, England. They are all countries that are welfare capitalist or democratic socialism. So their economies are not completely socialist, but more socialist than ours, and they're democracies. So when people like the far left in the United States talks about programs they want to implement, we're trying to mimic the kinds of programs they're trying to mimic, I should say, the kinds of programs you see in Western Europe, which nobody thinks of as being communist or dictatorial or whatever. So anyway, the features of a democratic socialist system is the government owns some of the largest industries and services, such as transportation, the mass media, and healthcare. It's noted in your text that in Sweden, the state controls, the government, the state controls about 27% of economic production. The rest of the economy is privately owned, but subject to extensive government regulation to keep everybody on the same page and make sure that the workers and consumers are not being taken advantage of. And three, they feature high taxation aimed at the wealthy, which fund extensive social welfare services. Welfare is broadly aimed at a wide cross section of society. Okay, so in order for redistribution to take place, in other words, we tax the rich and we give to the poor, we actually have to have a tax system in place that more heavily taxes the rich. Now, we do in the sense that the greatest dollar amount of the taxes paid is by the rich, but not proportionately. Okay, so again, in the 1950s, which I hear people say, we want to go back to the 1950s. Those were the good old days. Well, in the 1950s, the top tax rate was 90%. And everybody was cool with that. I guess maybe the rich weren't, but it worked, And so then the taxes that provided for welfare, although there weren't many welfare programs at that time, did literally come from the rich, and the benefits did literally go to low income people. But now that the top tax rate is under 40%, and you have so many wealthy not even paying taxes or paying next to no taxes, then there's no longer a system where we're taking from the rich and giving to the poor. And that's why you see the inequality gap continuing to get wider. Now, in democratic socialist countries like those in Western Europe, the rich are taxed proportionally more heavily than the rest of the people. And so when the benefits are returned to the people, you do have much less inequality. The inequality in Western European countries is half that of the United States. So it does work in reducing inequality. So you get the benefits of capitalism in the sense of having, this unprecedented array of tinker toys from which we can select and buy. But on the other hand, they have much more reduced inequality than we experience here in the United States. Now, nevertheless, the average person pays a lot of taxes there too. So it's not like people don't pay taxes. Everybody pays taxes. But the return is they have cradle to grave security. They have very generous welfare systems. And welfare is not directed just at the low income people, it's directed at the whole population. I was talking to a woman who I met in Switzerland. She was telling me that she will be getting laid off from her job. This is a few years ago. And I said, well, how's that work here in Switzerland? And she said, well, for the first year, 90% of my former pay will have to be paid by my former employer, which is a real disincentive to have to lay anyone off. And she said, and then after that, the government starts paying me 90% of my former pay until I get a job. And I don't know what the time limit was, if there is one, but I'm sure you can't just keep collecting like that forever. Anyway, much more generous system. Here in the United States, it's purposely set in a way that you only get at most half of what you used to earn. Why? Is because we figure people won't work unless we come up with a prod to make them work. So one of the prods we'll use to make them work is keep welfare benefits purposely low, and even unemployment benefits, even if it's not your fault you got laid off, nevertheless, you only get half the amount of money you made when you were working, even though your bills remain the same. They also have something called different things, but they're called family allowances. And some of the countries have cut back on this, or at least they've eliminated the firstborn from being included in this, which saves them a lot of cash. But the basic concept is as soon as you have a baby born to you, you automatically get money from the government. And it doesn't matter how rich or poor you are, you get money from the government. Now, the way these work is they understand that maybe 5 to 10% of the population will not spend the money on the kids. It's entirely possible to do that. That will happen. However, that's not the point. The point to them is 90 to 95% of the people will spend the money on their kids, and therefore it's a positive program. Here in the United States, we got all hung up on the 5 to 10% who are cheating, and as a result say, screw that program, keep those program benefits down because 5 to 10% are cheating, even though the rest of the people aren't cheating. And here in the United States, it's not even 10%, it's only 5% are cheating. So it's just interesting. And the reason why is because we are collectively much more conservative than are the people in Western Europe, European countries, or in Canada or in Australia. State capitalism is an economic and political system in which companies are privately owned, but they cooperate closely with the government. For example, would be Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. Japan has historically featured massive bribes of high-ranking government officials by corporations. But see, the idea is you got to be discreet. You got to keep it on the down low. And so, you don't want to get your hand caught in the cookie jar, as I saw happen to one of the Japanese prime ministers some years ago. He got caught with obvious bribing. It's like, dude, keep it cool, So it's easier to enact broad economic policies under state capitalism because of this close alliance of government and private business. To give you an example, the South Korean system of state capitalism has concentrated more than half of its total gross national product, its total output, in just 4 major corporations, which include Hyundai and LG. Now, just as a little aside, What does LG stand for? Yeah, I know. Life is good, which shows you're watching the ads, you're paying attention. Um, Actually, the original name of the corporation was Lucky Gold Star, hence LG. And I guess they figured, hey, people in the United States have figured they're making fortune cookies or something. So they thought that's not going to be a good brand. And so they instead changed it to LG and then pumped out ads going, life is good when you buy our product. And we, of course, the thoughtless sheep go, bah, okay. I even remember the commercials. Good. So capitalist economies are relatively more productive, but they also generate greater social inequality. Socialist economies produce greater social equality, but perhaps with a overall lower standard of living. Although that hasn't certainly happened in the Western Europe. This is congruent with arguments on the political right, conservatives, who tend to focus on productivity, while those on the left, liberals, tend to highlight distribution. Does everybody have enough? However, the more the government controls anything, the more the personal liberty of the citizenry is limited. Critics of socialism's lower productivity point to Marx's separation of reward from effort implied in his famous statement, to each according to need, from each according to ability, as a significant practical flaw. Socialism expresses Jean-Jacques Rousseau's notion that people realize their freedom as they participate in communal goals. But is the goal really liberty, or is it equality? Socialism tends to favor equality over liberty, capitalism, liberty over equality. George W. Bush, also known as W, said, in the long run, there is no capitalism without conscience. Regarding morality in the market system, what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong. Liberals describe the market as implicitly immoral because it ignores social good. Conservatives say that self-seeking is inherently moral because it represents people freely choosing their own chosen ends. Also, a market system offers people freedoms as producers and consumers and bridges national, religious, social, ethnic, and other historical divides. I just thought of another thing that Adam Smith warned against, and that was the formation of monopolies as disrupting business. And he also warned against that there will be individuals who become greedy in their business operations and companies who become greedy in their business operation. So the government has to constantly be on guard for that. And he was very prophetic. It probably was happening in his time and certainly has happened in our time. But this just in, I saw that the government is prosecuting, this happens apparently in the poultry business, but prosecuting is a Pilgrim's Pride for price fixing when it comes to poultry. And apparently it's endemic throughout the industry, because I saw that 5 buyers at some other companies were also being indicted for price fixing. So price fixing is a monopoly. So if you're selling tie-dye shirts for 10 and I'm selling them for 20 and you're starting to kill my business, you and I have my people contact your people and we have lunch. And at lunch we decide, listen, this is crazy. Why compete with each other? Why don't we both just charge 15? There's plenty for both of us at 15. And so a monopoly is formed. Why? We're the only 2 people producing tie-dye shirts. We'll fix the price. Okay. Work in the post-industrial economy. Trends in the United States. Small farmers and agricultural work are declining with the growth of corporate agribusiness. 2, factory work. Blue-collar jobs, which are relatively high-paying jobs, are being replaced by white-collar service jobs, which are relatively low-paying. Check out figure 16-2. I'm sorry, yes, 16-2. Make that 17-2. Whew. I got it, 17-2. And the third is a shift from primary market jobs, which are career occupations that provide extensive benefits to the workers, to secondary labor markets, which have minimal benefits. They're non-career oriented. They're low skill assembly and clerical or warehouse work. Many of these secondary labor jobs are increasingly being handled by or through temporary employment companies. So the idea is, again, businesses are reluctant to give people full-time hours because then they have to pay them benefits, but you still need workers. And so the idea is you hire exactly the number of workers you need, no matter when things are rough and you would normally lay off people, you have that skeletal workforce, and then you can supplement it with temporary workers from a temporary work agency who you don't have to pay benefits for. You can get them on the cheap, and that way have enough workforce when things are booming. Map 17-1 shows right to work laws across the United States. Now, right to work laws are kind of an interesting name for them because what these are is they began, I think the first one was attempted to be implemented in Wisconsin. And the idea was that all the government workers could no longer collectively bargain. And so the point was to union bust. Why? Because if you have unions, they drive up workers' pay. Now, going back to when we talked about Karl Marx and surplus value, we talked about the fact that the worker's interest and the owner's interest are mutually opposed. If I'm the owner, the more I pay you, the less I make on your labor. And so unions move up the wages. Why? Because they have enough power saying, if you don't pay us, we're all not going to work. Now what are you going to do? Union membership was once as high as 1/3 of the workforce in the United States. Now it's only 11% of the workforce. So this is partly due to the so-called right to work laws, which are being pushed by conservatives. And why? Because conservatives typically represent big business interests. And so, you want to lowball the workers' pay. Unions oppose these laws because they limit the power of unions to organize workers. And you will notice when you look at the right to work laws that have been successfully passed, they're all red states, meaning conservative states, compared to the blue states, which are more heavily liberal Democrat states. Well, you will see the changing patterns of work in the United States. And the way I can describe it is imagine, because usually I draw this on the board, but imagine a pyramid. Got the image? That was how work looked in the 1900s, or how the economy worked. And so at the top of the pyramid was the CEO, and as you go down the pyramid, the various vice presidents. The bottom of the pyramid was the workers. But that was the heyday for the workers, because you could come in off the boat, so to speak, as an immigrant, immediately pick up a job, say at Bethlehem Steel, and get cradle to grave benefits for the rest of your life. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying working at a steel mill is any day at the beach. It's not. But the point is, you didn't even need a high school diploma, and you could be getting cradle to grave benefits, decent income, retirement, nothing to worry about. Then it changed to sort of a diamond shape. Diamond. Okay, you got the picture. That was, say, the 1950s. So the diamond shape was the heyday for the middle class. And my dad's a really good example. So, the fat part of the diamond was the middle class. So my dad had a high school diploma, and yet the work he did was the kind of work that today you'd have to have a master's degree to do. My mom didn't have to work. Remember, at that time, only 25% of the women were in the workforce. My mom could stay at home, and that was what she wanted anyway. My dad was able to put two or three children through college. Had a nice retirement, had nothing to worry about when he retired, paid off the house, all with a high school diploma. The more current way to look at the economy is an hourglass. What an hourglass is, like in two inverted pyramids. What's happening now is the middle class is getting squeezed out. And so 1/3 of the middle class is moving on up into the upper diamond, and 1/3 is moving on, or pyramid, I should say, and the other third is moving on down into the inverted pyramid. Now, why is this critical? Because the middle class is the backbone of America. That's the average American. And as a result of the big squeeze of inequality and all the other pressures on paychecks, the middle class is going. That's the trend. Maybe things will change, but that's the trend right now. Okay. Professions, you need to know about them. Why? Because you seek to be a professional. The description is on page 154, or excuse me, 454. It's a prestigious white-collar occupation that requires extensive formal education. Professional jobs are expected to increase in this millennium. So again, thinking about the hourglass figure I just described as a way to look at the economy, the professional jobs are in the upper part of that hourglass. So as we go to a more or less rich society and a more or less poor society, excuse me, people who are more or less rich and people who are more or less poor. So as professionals, you're in the upper part. The word amateur, often contrasted to professional, is from the Latin amator, meaning lover. Hey, and aren't so many amateurs when it comes to love? Tell me about it, Maynard. This makes the amateur one who pursues an activity merely for the love of doing so. You know, it's almost trite, it's almost a cliche, but it's still true, is that the whole idea is to figure out what is it you love to do. Now, as we talked about before, most people do not love what they're doing. Half of Americans do not like their job. So no wonder they don't want to go to work each week or can't wait for the weekend. But if you figure out what it is you love doing, and how will you know what it is? It's your passion. It's your God-given gifts. It's your creator-given gifts. It's that which, this is what I really want to spend my time doing. So for those people who are not able to follow their passion and are working in some job that they don't find particularly fulfilling at all, they can't wait to get home and pursue their hobby, because their hobby is their passion. Now imagine, and there are people who love what they're doing. And so, I love what I'm doing. I do like getting paid for it, but I love what I'm doing, And so imagine everybody was following their passion, utilizing their God-given gifts in the workplace. Do you realize it wouldn't even be the workplace anymore? Everybody would love doing it and would be called the joy place. So the function of the education system should be to help us determine what our creator-given gifts are and how to utilize them and make a buck out of it. It's so simple. Then you wouldn't have these people are lazy. No, they're doing jobs that don't take advantage of their God-given gifts. We don't have the opportunities to take advantage of their God-given gifts. All right, 4 characteristics of a profession. 1 is theoretical knowledge based on extensive schooling and regular interaction with our peers. So, you may need a graduate degree to get your particular job, to have the credentials, and you have regular interaction with your peers in your major. And then when you graduate, you're reading the professional journals, you're going to professional conferences. You may have to obtain continuing education units to keep your license in your profession and so forth. So all that's devoted to your theoretical knowledge. 2, self-regulated training and practice. Often professionals are self-employed, self-evaluating, and responsible for maintaining a code of ethics. They're often licensed. In Pennsylvania, the nursing profession developed its own code of ethics. The social work profession developed its own code of ethics. And social workers oversee whether or not a social worker violated those ethics and determines what to do about it. And the same thing happens with nursing, all under the auspices of the state or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that sets up the legal framework for this all to take place. 3, authority over clients. Clients are expected to follow the direction and advice of professionals. 4, community orientation rather than self-interest. Professionals are to serve the needs of clients and the broader community rather than their own self-interest or income. That's also why there's licensing, why there's codes against advertising for physicians, and reluctance to advertise and discuss fees. I think it's interesting that there's codes against advertising for physicians, but not for lawyers. Yeah, it's like, well, how come lawyers can advertise but physicians cannot? They're both professionals, and the ones you see a lot, especially on television, are the injury lawyers. I'll get you every dime you're entitled to. You come to me, I'm the injury lawyer. It's interesting too because you think about the injury lawyers, like, oh my God, I could get millions of dollars in this malpractice suit or whatever. But the typical settlement for a malpractice suit, the modal settlement, the one that happens most often, is zero. You get nothing. The original meaning of the word profession was a taking of a vow. A professor was thus a person who took a religious vow, revealing the origins of the European universities and the church. Sadly, I break my vow with every presentation because my vow was to be always funny. This explains why ethics and public responsibility continue to figure so prominently in professional life because of the early linkage with the church, morality, ethics, and so forth. If you ever get, strike, when you graduate, you will notice all the regalia goes back to medieval times. Even the cap and gown goes back to the medieval universities because you're having the universities held in these stone-walled buildings, which are cold in the winter. And so the gown, the professor wore, was to help keep the professor warm. And when you attend graduation, we'll see the college marshal comes out with a mace, holding a big mace, which don't get any more medieval than a mace. And all the colors and pageantry that go with it are all back from medieval times. Okay, well, not everybody's a big fan of professionals. George Bernard Shaw, the playwright, said a profession is a conspiracy against the layman. I got another one here. If you need to invoke your academic pedigree or job title for people to believe what you have to say, then you need a better argument. Alrighty here. Unemployment, boy, it's quite the big thing right now because of the pandemic. It's kind of sad too because the unemployment rate prior to the pandemic was the lowest in 50 years at 3.5%, which was a continuation of the economic surge that began under the Obama administration and continued under the Trump administration at a slightly lower pace, but it's been that long of an economic progression. Anyway, it was the lowest in decades, and now, of course, it's boomed again because the unemployment has boomed since the pandemic. Now, the problem with the unemployment numbers is it counts only people who are unemployed and actively seeking work. So unemployment benefits, when they run out, you're no longer counted because they don't know you exist anymore. There's no way of keeping track. So typically unemployment underestimates the true number of people who are unemployed. The underground economy. Well, I alluded to this when we were talking about welfare. The underground economy is $460 billion a year just in unpaid taxes, people scamming the tax system. And so, it's amazing because the IRS can't possibly audit all the tax returns. And there's only, even in the upper income segments, maybe 1.5% to 2.5% get audited. That's it, which is why so many of the wealthy can get away with a lot of things because they never even get audited. And they have such amazingly complex ways to evade paying taxes that even the IRS can't keep tabs on all of it. So again, when we go all upset and say, well, these poor people are nickel and dime in the system and ripping us off, we're talking at the most $50 billion, which is no small chunk of change. I totally agree with that. But it's not very much compared to 460 billion that people are ripping off the system by not paying their fair share of taxes. So if you're upset about that, get mad at the rich. Don't get mad at the poor because they're nickel and diming it. All right, page 459, you need to know about corporations. It's an organization with a legal existence, including rights and liabilities apart from those of its members. So why do you incorporate? Well, you incorporate because then if I have a company and it's in my name and I do something that is illegal, I can avoid some level of legal obligation because it's incorporated. So the company gets sued, not me. Now there are limitations of that because you can see sometimes heads of companies have in fact been found legally liable for some of the things, some of the shenanigans that have taken place within their corporation. But the idea is it's literally called limited liability corporations. It reduces your liability to lawsuits. Okay, so quiz question. In what state are more corporations incorporated than any other state in the United States? Now, I say that because it doesn't matter where your company is physically located. You can incorporate, go through the legal process of incorporating in any state you choose. So what state do you think has the most favorable tax laws? I'll give you a moment to think about that. It's a small state. It's in the Northeast. It was the first of the colonies to join the United States and help form the United States. It's Delaware. Yeah, little Delaware. Here's another little known fact about Delaware. Delaware also has very low property taxes, very low sales taxes. That's why you see so many people from the southern tier go down to Delaware to buy their booze and so forth because it's cheaper, less taxes. Anyway, another little known fact is right now you're seeing with the trillions of dollars that have been devoted, and necessarily so, by the government to the pandemic. Well, how are you going to pay for that? Because we're not getting the tax revenues. I mentioned before, under the Trump tax law, the Republican tax law passed 2 years ago under the Trump administration. We are losing approximately $1 trillion a year in tax revenues. So when you have all of a sudden spending $2, $4, $6 trillion in a given year because of the circumstance of the pandemic, there is no way your tax revenues coming in that year are going to make up for it, nor can you suddenly jack up taxes on everybody to make up for it because the people are hurting economically. So that ain't going to happen. So it creates a deficit. So right now we're running the greatest deficit ever historically in a given year since World War II, when so much government spending had to take place. So I saw a chart the other day where we are now reaching the same level as World War II of our deficits. So this means inflation is going to happen. Now, inflation means that you have too many dollars chasing too few goods. So this inevitably happens when you print too much money. And we talked about this when we were talking about what happens in some of the countries of the world where they can't pay back their debts to the World Bank. They just start printing money. So the inflation, the Federal Reserve, which sets the interest rates for banks and effectively determine how much we pay for a car loan or a mortgage, has said, we don't care about inflation. We're going to keep interest rates low to help out the economy. Okay, so that means if I have $100 in the bank and there's 10% inflation over a given year, that means my money is now worth only $90 the next year, okay? or for people who are on fixed incomes like Social Security. I just saw Social Security is going to go a whopping, the average recipient's going to get an extra $30 a year starting next year. There's no way that keeps pace with inflation when inflation's really kicking into high gear. So the government does go, oh my God, inflation's 10%. Let's up Social Security by 10% next year. It can't happen. There's no way they can afford to do that. Okay, so what would be a hedge against inflation? Like, what can I have on hand in case inflation goes crazy? Is gold. So traditionally, people have bought gold, particularly rich people, and they'll have as much as 10 to 15% of their total assets in gold. And the idea is because when inflation goes up, typically the price of gold goes up as well. And so when all your other stocks and bonds are making nothing, like right now, you're getting almost no interest on bonds where you're loaning the government money, and you're getting almost no money. You're getting no interest at all on your savings account. So what do you suppose do in this environment? Well, you hang on to gold, because when the ice cream hits the fan, gold can get you out of this country. So the idea is you buy it in the form of small coins that are negotiable if you need to, so that if there is a financial emergency, you're good to go. You got gold. Now, the other thing people are starting to buy, and you heard this from me, is including corporations and wealthy individuals, is Bitcoin. Mark my words. You'll look at this lecture 10 years, 5 years from now, you go, man, did he nail it? Bitcoin is going to explode in value, and it's never going to go down to its previous levels anymore, because the basis of Bitcoin is the blockchain, and the blockchain is going to replace so much of what we do in financing and other endeavors in the United States. So it's going to become the new foundation for the economy is the blockchain, and the Bitcoin is the token of the blockchain. So, hey, you heard it here, maybe last. All right, so there's a problem. When you buy gold, the problem with buying gold is the government then knows you have gold and they can confiscate it. So when the government said that we're no longer going to back the money supply with gold, which people still argue today, well, we should back all the money supplied by gold. Well, all the gold ever mined in the history of the world would fill one oil tanker. That's all there is. That's why it's always been a storehouse of value, because it's always in limited supply. Remember, supply and demand. Okay, so if the government would back all the dollars by gold and silver, there'd be a cap at how many dollars we could have, which would severely limit the economy. And so as a result, years ago, they abandoned that. And as a result, and it used to be that every dollar bill you had was redeemable in silver or gold. In fact, it used to say in a dollar bill, it was a silver certificate, right? Well, that was the old days. Now the money supply is no longer backed by gold and silver, which means the downside is they can print money endlessly, so to speak, and just create massive inflation. So the government, there's no need to stop spending. You just keep spending, 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 and it's like kicking the can down the road. Don't worry, your grandchildren can pay for these debts. It ain't going to affect you in your lifetime. Not your problem. Okay, so the government can at any point reclaim that gold. So that's a law. So in the event of an emergency, the government can reclaim the gold if it has to restart the economic system again. Okay, so wealthy people don't want the government to know they have gold. So how do they get around this? They buy the gold with cash, or they buy the gold with postal money orders, which are untraceable. Well, now you have a second problem. Where are you going to store your gold? So if you have it at home, you could get robbed, blah, blah, blah. So what people will do is they'll have a storage facility that specializes in gold and silver stored for you. Well, getting back to Delaware, I know it was a long story to get here. Getting back to Delaware, beneath the streets of Wilmington is one of those storehouses of gold, where there's vast amounts of gold bullion under the streets of Delaware, in these giant cages, secure cages, and so forth. So if the ice cream hits the fan, or perhaps I should say when, you want to get dynamite and picks and shovels and head to Wilmington. But here's the best part. The gold is at a fixed price that the government will reimburse you. So, for example, right now the price of gold is, I don't know, around $1,700, $1,800 an ounce, somewhere in there. But let's assume a national emergency hits and the whole economic system is threatened to go down the toilet. Gold could go to $5,000 an ounce, $10,000 an ounce. Who knows? That's exactly why wealthy people hang on to it in the event of emergency. They got cash because the dollar will be worth nothing. Because think about it, the dollar is backed, and it even says it on there, by your full faith and trust in the American government. That should tell you everything you need to know about how safe that dollar bill is. Anyway, so the whole idea is to have the gold, but the government law says it's a fixed price at which they'll reimburse you, and it's something like about $45 an ounce. So if there is a national catastrophe and the economy collapses and the government comes to get your gold, and even though gold is currently worth $10,000 at that point an ounce, they'll redeem it for you at the price of 45 bucks an ounce. What a deal, huh? That's why people who have money and hide the gold don't let the government know they have it. Now, here's another interesting thing coming down the line. For a while there, the plan was to put tracers on the cash so that the government could trace everywhere it's gone. Now, of course, the official reason is we're trying to flush out drug money. Mm-hmm. And what about the rest of us? So when you use cash, nobody knows what your purchases are. Now, most of us use credit cards, which means everybody knows what your purchases are, but not with cash. Well, the idea is, okay, the original idea was to put tracers on the cash, electronic tracers, and I think that's actually happened in some cases. But now the new plan is to develop a digital currency. So in other words, there won't be cash anymore. You'll have to use digital currency or a credit card, which means every transaction will be traceable by the government. This digital currency is not to be confused with Bitcoin, two totally different things. But stay tuned for that one, which sounds really efficient and so forth. But you got to remember the hidden motive is the government can then follow all transactions, your transactions. Okay, economic concentration for the exam on page 460. Simply put, the largest corporations dominate the United States economy, even though most U.S. corporations are small with assets of less than $500,000. In fact, 80% of U.S. employers have 15 or fewer employees. Okay, so that's important to know. The backbone of America is small business. 80% of U.S. employers have 15 or fewer employees. That's why what's happening in the pandemic is so tragic, because it's driving so many businesses out of existence. 80% of all U.S. businesses are small businesses. But but the government listed some 3,266 corporations, each with assets exceeding 2.5 billion, representing 81% of all corporate assets. So the economy is tightly concentrated, at least in terms of the amount of money we're talking about in big corporations, even though small businesses predominate. Conglomerates, now why is this a concern? Well, when you look at a company like Amazon, if you go down the total output of entire countries and then you start listing in their corporations, you'll see Amazon appears ahead of many, 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 many countries. Well, okay, but see, nothing that happens at Amazon is democratically conducted, right? It's a business, it's a for-profit business that has more economic power than entire countries. That can be scary. Conglomerates and corporate linkages. Economic concentration has created the conglomerate, a giant corporation composed of many smaller corporations. The example they have that's in your text is PepsiCo, PepsiCo, a conglomerate that includes Pepsi-Cola, Frito-Lay, Gatorade, Tropicana, and Quaker Foods. Many conglomerates are linked because they own each other's stock, creating worldwide corporate alliances of staggering size. Well, that very connection is why when the Great Recession took place in 2008, we came within days. I'm not exaggerating. Go read about it. We came within days of the entire world economy melting down. It started in the United States. Uh, you could start seeing the Bank of England was nearing bankruptcy. Iceland, the entire company or country of Iceland went bankrupt. You could see the domino effect spreading around the whole world before we finally saw. And it was all because of some greed of investment bankers at that time. But everything was so tightly interconnected, everything began to fall apart in the economy like dominoes. Many conglomerates, and corporations are linked through interlocking directorates. In other words, they're boards of directors. While perfectly legal, these boardroom connections give corporations valuable information about other companies' marketing strategies and products. It can lead to illegal activities such as price fixing, which we already talked about, and insider trading. Insider trading is if I'm sitting on another company's board and I know they're planning to introduce a new product, and I know once this product hits the market, man, this stock's going to skyrocket. What I do is before they introduce the product the night before, I go buy a crap load of that stock and watch it go. Well, that's called insider trading. In other words, that I had information that wasn't available to the rest of the public, and I'm not allowed to legally take advantage of that. One of the interesting inconsistencies of the Republican conservative philosophy of the United States is the claim that expanding government results in inefficiency, while expanding corporations ensures efficiency. On page 460, corporations and competition. Corporations, are they competitive? Adam Smith, the architect of capitalism, stressed the need for open competition in the market. However, in the United States, the economy is not entirely competitive. That part of the economy consisting of small businesses and self-employed people is competitive, but there's a really high failure rate, which is, of course, going up exponentially because of the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, the average restaurant lasts only about 6 months, and the average small business lasts only about 2 years, and they're bankrupt. But the large corporate core of the economy is not truly competitive due to corporate linkages I just described and due to the formation of monopolies, which we talked about, and oligopolies. Oligopolies are where one or two companies totally dominate the market. Suppose I'm Microsoft, and what happens is I see some promising technology that somebody developed that's going to threaten my market share if it ever comes to total fruition, and that person's able to capitalize on it and market it enough and so forth. So what I do is I approach that person and say, now here's the deal. I'm going to offer you $10 million for your business. Now, right now it's only worth $5 million. So I'm going to give you double what your business is worth, but I also want to have the patent on that product you developed. Now, in return, you're a millionaire and you're set for life. Now, yes, it's true that you could turn your 5 million business into 15, 20 million, but on the other hand, you never know how it works in technology, because tomorrow somebody else may come up with a patent that makes your idea antiquated. And so I buy you out. And that way, there's no competition. I just bought you out. And so this is what big corporations do within their respective fields all across the world. The power of the corporations is so great that only the government, not competition, can restrain them. Yet the government is heavily lobbied by corporate America, and the government is the largest customer of the large corporations. And finally, the government has intervened to save struggling corporations, as we saw after the Great Recession. Often regulation of big business has been too little too late. If you put all this together and how the corporations work together and so forth, this setup rivals that of state capitalism that we described takes place in Japan and South Korea, where the government works closely with big business. As a result of the Great Recession in 2010, a financial overhaul law was passed that triggers hundreds of new rules regulating corporations, banks, credit card companies, mortgage lenders, and savings and loans companies. It includes creation of a included creation of a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the Office of Financial Research, which collected and monitors financial information. Now, you may recall or not that a few years ago, Wells Fargo Bank illegally opened up accounts for people, for their customers, that they didn't request. Now, this is partly because the way it works in big banks is the employees often get sales incentives. So if they can get you to not only be have a checking account and a savings account, but also to invest money in some of their products, their investment products and so forth, they get a big bonus. And so they started opening up these accounts that were totally unsolicited by the customers. People complained, the federal government found out and massively fined Wells Fargo Bank for doing this. Well, guess what group figured that this was going on? The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that I just described, that was created in 2010. One of the interesting things happened when Trump took over is Trump systematically began to get rid of the Financial Protection Bureau by just undercutting all the funding for it. People sometimes think, oh, the founding fathers, they must have been big fans of banks. Just the opposite, at least in the form of Thomas Jefferson, who said, banks are more dangerous than standing armies. Okay. Corporations in the global economy. I'm going to leave you with this quote. I gave you a quote a few chapters ago by the industrialist Ledwell Denny, who said, criticizing Great Britain's failure to retain its premier status in the world. He said, too wise to govern the world, we shall simply own it. Okay, so here's a quote by the then chairman of Dow Chemical Company, Carl R. Gerstacker, and he's talking about the beauty of multinational corporations. He said, I have long dreamed of buying an island owned by no nation and of establishing the world headquarters of Dow Chemical on the truly neutral ground of such an island, beholden to no nation or society or its laws. We could then really operate in the US as US citizens, in Japan as Japanese citizens, and in Brazil as Brazilians, rather than being governed by the laws of the US or any other country. In other words, we could just operate with impunity and do whatever we want to make money. No regulations. Hey kids, that's all I got, and that's the last chapter to prepare you for the second cumulative exam. So I'll be back soon with the chapters for the third cumulative exam. In the meantime, study on and do well in the exam, as I know you can do. Bye for now, and stay safe and healthy, everybody.